proximity within the three spaces, home, work, play, is it multiplies the potential for impact within your limited amount of time on this earth. And you're going to buy a bad property. I mean, it's good. You do enough of them. I bought one, I think it was like the third or fourth. It's a 2-bed, 1-bath. It was a nightmare. We had the first 3 tenants in there were horrible. I mean, just vacancy, damage. And it was around the corner from my house. I thought, this is a slam dunk.
Welcome back to the Roots podcast. Today we have a very special guest, which is Rex Fiser. Rex is a close friend and mentor. He's the owner of the brokerage we're a part of, At Properties of Central Indiana. He has a very large real estate portfolio of residential homes, some commercial real estate, and a variety of other asset classes. Max, what are we wondering about with Rex today?
Yeah, I think we want to just dive straight deep into the background and figure out, how do you go from the sports and entertainment industry into being like the king of Fountain Square?
I appreciate the rounding up on Fountain Square. It's great to be in that space. It's hard to believe we've been there almost 20 years. I started my professional career within sports and entertainment, largely evaluating the pricing mix for pro sports teams and concert tours in the top 40 cities of the U.S., looking at how those different entities could maximize their business and what the elements were that had the greatest determinants of not only their success in a show, but the price elasticity of their offering. And what was interesting to me, what really started to get my interest peaked in real estate, I was doing some work for the Bulls, and I noticed that they had to win enough games to get into the playoffs, compete for championships, and perform at a very, very high level for business to be great. And I couldn't figure out why the Cubs didn't have to. Like, they could be out of the running in June, and it didn't matter. They were going to sell out. Merch was going to go well. Corporate sponsorship was going to be solid. What I realized as I started to peel back the layers was that if I put Wrigley Field where the United Center is, the business falls off a cliff. It was a lot more about Wrigleyville and the right elements within the proximity of that venue than it was about Wrigley Field, which sounds sacrilegious. It's hard for me to say. But as I then took that to other markets like Fenway and married them up, and then the other venues such as the United Center, like where the Oakland Athletics play, it held true. And so I started to look at the elements of Wrigleyville that make it so robust for an entertainment experience, and then backed that out into, how does that impact the businesses? How does that impact the value of that real estate? It all came back to the right real estate mix, owner to renter occupancy ratios, commercial and at a certain amount of density, the access to downtown, the ease of getting in and out of the neighborhood is tremendous. Public transit access. And as I started to gain a critical mass of data for these tier 1 neighborhoods that housed a venue, I realized I could pull the venue out and it just kind of held true for neighborhoods. And so then I backed that out into, well, what is it? What's the consistent process? Is there a consistent process for cities that have revitalized from the post-World War II urban flight? And it turned out that there was a very at a high level, simple process of getting a critical mass of density around 3 different space utilizations over somewhere between a 35-year and 50-year play. And what that was the first thing you do, at least, for the majority of the time, but from now back to then, the 50s, was you go figure out a way to draw a critical mass of business into a dense urban core. You get people during the best hours of their day working in close proximity, and those people and you largely do that by appealing through tax incentives or different sort of stimuli at a local and state level to revitalize those areas and get those people in. Those people are going to need restaurants. They're going to need office supplies. They're going to need dry cleaners. They're, all of these elements that start to build back a commercial core. And you got to let that bake to critical mass. We saw that start in Indianapolis in the mid 70s, right? Once that had reached a certain level of critical mass, we had the commercial support to then go into the next space, which needs to be play. All right. So we said sports. Austin said music, right? We look at that and we say, okay, we're going to be a sports town. We're going to go after the Pan Am Games. We're going to, establish the Pacers. We're going to bring the Colts here. We're going to start to level that up at critical mass. Mm-hmm. That drives a whole nother level of commercial diversification, right? And business pull into Indianapolis, right? That also has to bake along with it. That takes some time. In Indianapolis, that took another 15 years, maybe could be argued more. That then what we started to see by the early 2000s, 2008, 2009, that had hit this point where we had enough development, enough commercial establishment, enough attraction within the urban core to start to really ramp up residential production. And so
So is that when you
home.
saw, sorry to cut you off, continue talking, but I do have a burning question.
Sure.
Is that when you saw the gentrification, quote unquote, or redevelopment, whatever word you want to call it, happen in Indianapolis?
So what I started to see is this would have been about 05, 04, 05. I saw a city that had successfully accomplished the construction of, the first leg of the stool, if you will, in office, in
it's like work.
Yep, work and play, right? And we were kind of taking this next level up. You were seeing a next level of office. You were seeing a next level. Visit Indy was really hitting hard. That's when we were really starting to win conventions, conferences, and that's when we went from the RCA Dome to Lucas Oil Stadium. Just a whole. That's when we got
Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So that, along with, I'll say, the airport is a huge benefit. Things like the cultural trail, massive pull to be able to then start kicking this inflection point where we could pull residential density. Because back before about maybe 06, maybe even 07, 08, if you wanted to live downtown and you couldn't afford Lockerbie, you were either in Riley Towers or you were on the canal. That was it. Otherwise, you were in Broad Ripple or not here. Right?
Downtown was a crater.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was growing up. It was a crater.
My teenage, even during college. Yeah.
So I looked at that and said, with where this is, residential is the next inflection point. I need to find a Wrigleyville I can afford.
And it ripples out from there because we're really talking about centralized downtown.
Yes.
Fountain Square being just off the edge of that. One thing you said that caught my attention is be able to work, live, and play. Do you have the numbers on how many people that are at Switchboard, the co-working space? Sidebar, the week before I met you, I had just watched the documentary on WeWork, the entire series. And then I met Rex and he's like, yeah, I own this. We converted this from an old church and it's all these office buildings. I'm like, this is WeWork completely. How many people at Switchboard live right in Fountain Square? And
about 70% of our membership.
Yeah.
So
I see it. When I'm
there.
Yeah.
It's interesting bringing up WeWork. You look at, there are a lot of lessons within the WeWork model. And I think there's a ton to glean from that, both rise and fall. You see a number of models within co-working and office that take kind of that multi-site gym offering. But the reality of the power within office and co-working is getting, again, that critical mass of people next to each other during the best hours of their day. Now you can introduce diversification in profession, in story, especially now that people are, doing more remote work. Yeah. And so when we expanded to the second building, we decided to do that in a concentrated area because, I can go to any YMCA in Indiana, but I go to why?
Yeah, 150 steps away. Exactly. Is the second building.
Exactly.
Well, I think what's most fascinating about your story and experiences is you think at a very high level, and you're thinking of like whole city economic and cultural development.
And the goal is to sell tickets for the Bulls.
In seeing that as a precursor to residential real estate development and critical mass, it's interesting because Max and I both got in kind of at the peak or the first peak of maybe many other peaks in terms of like residential being extremely hot. Now, it obviously helped that interest rates were extremely low, 3%. And, it was real estate was all the rage at the time. But Indianapolis was kind of like hot and like nationally had a focus. And that's when we started. And it's almost all we ever knew in real estate. Whereas you were kind of watching in the shadows all this come up. I want to go back to your story, though. I know you used to live not downtown.
Right.
And then you tried to make that move. Could you, walk us through that transition in your life?
Sure. So I originally, when we moved our company from Rose Hellman's incubator to the Circle, I originally lived at Gardens and Canal Court right there because, again, it was Riley Towers or the canal, right? Yep. And then, after about a year and a half, I bought a home up on the Northwest side, on a city course. Hey, great. I think I paid
doing what everyone does,
$50K. You're right.
Get out the verbs.
And then as I started to get into real estate as Fountain Square became, the Wrigleyville I was going to go engage in, from a place of investment real estate. I started spending more time there. And there were two elements that really struck me. One, you had a neighborhood here that had a very relationally oriented culture, right? Front porch culture. People knew each other. The businesses that launched got community support by the neighbors. You had, people would say hi, introduce themselves, engage. I found that tremendously powerful. I think it was also driven largely by necessity because as that neighborhood vacated, coming out it was the entertainment district, the theater district of the 1920s and 30s that started in the 50s to see a downslide, vacate out, and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to get by. Right? You had to come together. You had to know each other. You had to be willing to, engage. It largely became a, multi-generational, neighborhood with a high concentration of poverty. But the cultural thread there, the element was very appealing because nobody had a qualm about walking up, introducing themselves and engaging. The other reality that we saw was there were a lot of kids out. Didn't matter if it was 10 in the morning, 11 at night, and their families weren't it wasn't that they didn't care. You had a lot of single moms. You had a lot of young parents. You had a lot of people who going through hard stuff who were just trying to get by, working 2 jobs, trying to put together anything that they could. And, we felt at that point that one of the ways that we could make an impact was to move down and establish a life in Fountain Square and have an impact. Now, we did that very idealistically and very ignorantly. And we spun our wheels for a few years, really trying to help our neighbors. We just did not understand how people with a different background and story than ours were motivated, engaged, in their kind of day-to-day perspective and matrix through which they live their lives. And so at the end of 3 years of living in Fountain Square and looking at kind of 3 years of failure from that lens, my wife and I just did a postmortem and said, okay, this is either an experiment that we learned a lot but failed at, or this is a phase 2 where we need to make some significant changes. And at that point, we came to a determination that we did not, again, we were ignorant. We did not understand how we could have a sustainable community impact in our neighborhood. And we had a proximity issue. I was still traveling around the U.S., half the month. My wife was still working in Carmel, every day, Monday through Friday. And so we made a determination to tighten up the radius of our lives to, 5-mile radius of our home and go look for a career opportunity with organizations who had a sustained impact within our neighborhood. I ended up over at Shepherd Community Center, running their fundraising department, an organization that serves the Near East Side and has now for, I believe, 30 years. And Gabby ended up over at the Oaks Academy at the Brookside campus as they were getting launched. And it was tremendously impactful. And what we learned was not only how do we have an impact in our community to those who need a hand up the most, we learned how does a donor, a volunteer, a program member, how does that ecosystem come together and meet the needs and hopes that everybody's stepping into there. We learned a lot about sustainable community development and how to take how to introduce enough margin to sustainably do worthwhile things. And I think that was a big miss before, was we just didn't think enough about the margin necessary to endure.
One thing that I heard you say there is failing well. And that's something that you speak on often is let's go jump in. We're going to live here. We're going to live in Fountain Square. Either this is going to be a great experiment. We're going to learn a lot, or it was just a good experiment and that's what it was. There's lessons to be learned. Pack up, move, and figure something else out. Instead, it seems like you doubled down into that relational equity. Like, let's go live in this 5-mile square. Let's figure out how we can improve and better people's lives and make that difference. And that's cool to see on the back end of it.
Well, you only had
Literally
one leg of the
planning
stool. You were doing living, but you weren't working.
Yeah.
Right.
And you possibly weren't playing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is ironic, but makes sense.
I feel like you asked about like, hey, back up to where you didn't move or where you didn't live in Fountain Square, but you lived in Indy. Trying to at me, trying to tell me I need to move. Or do I need to go play where I live?
It helps.
I will tell you what we learned within the tightening up of proximity, and that's been an iterative process from that point on, was proximity within the 3 spaces: live, work, play, right? Play, work, play, home. Yeah. Home, work, play. Is it multiplies the potential for impact within your limited amount of time on this earth.
So kind of a segue here. You're talking a lot about community impact and economic development in some ways. Would you say you invest in real estate primarily as a means to make an impact there, or is it more for personal financial reasons?
That's a great question as well. I'd say I invest in real estate as a way to steward resources that are ultimately unto my purpose. So there are 3 concentric circles that I use as a lens of if I take on something or don't. And as the more those circles come together, the more I know I'm operating within my wheelhouse. If those aren't touching, I'm probably not doing it. And that's coach, connect, and create. So as those, I'm looking for the opportunities that empower my ability to do more of that, right? With the time that I have, right? Within the relationships that I have and those that I'll make. So the way that investment real estate for me plays into that is, investment real estate for me, it's a long game. It takes a strategy, but it's a fairly simple game to play, right? You kind of know the spreadsheet. Yes, there can be curveballs. You got to plan for those. You got to, do your due diligence. You put your strategy together and then you execute the strategy, right? And it isn't that things don't go, sideways, but you need to factor that in and play the averages. If you do that and play the long game, you start seeing this rising tide of equity and cash production that's a resource that can be utilized to go compound time again. And you and I, we've talked about this capacity equation, which for me is one of the most impactful points of accountability. The equation is pretty simple. It's your financial capacity multiplied by your capacity of time, multiplied by your capacity of relationship, equals your emotional margin to take on any challenge, problem, or opportunity that you have in front of you. And so, right, you look at that and say, anytime I am out of any of those 3, right, if I am out of cash, I am not thinking about anything other than how do I solve this problem, right? If I am overcommitted on time, I'm just going to the next meeting, into the next problem. I'm reacting. I am not present. And if I have fractured relationship, especially with those who are closest to me, my natural advocates, those that are with me in the things that are worthy of pursuit, then I got to go step towards that, repair those relationships and move through before I can regain that presence. Once we have that laid out, we look at, okay, making money is, that is likely out of the 3, the easiest that can be done. We can't make any more time. We get what we get, right? And the relational capacity, the relational wealth is the most powerful. It's the hardest to build, right? So then if all that is true, we should use our cash to invest in the things that can be moved out of our time bucket, right? So that we can be freed up to build the relational wealth in the ways that, that align with what we are here to do, right? And if we build that relational wealth, if this is what I believe it is, we invest our money to free up our time to go build the relational wealth within our community, then the equation takes care of itself and the tide rises. Right? But if I get wiped out tomorrow, it's not going to be my ability to make money that's going to make everything okay. It's my people that are going to come running, right? And we'll take a step forward and move from there. So investment real estate or anything I do in the financial arena and facet of my life is largely done from the lens of, will this help grow a pot of assets that give me greater ability to multiply my time within the reality of the relational wealth I'm here to build, so that I can have a critical mass of emotional capacity to move well. Does that make sense?
It does, but it might not help someone who's like starting with their first property. So I want to hear a little bit about the journey from working at Shepherd, which is a non-for-profit, committed to ending the cycle of poverty downtown. That has nothing to do with owning investment real estate, into investment real estate during this kind of up and coming period of Indianapolis when it was transitioning from a crater hole to a booming metropolis. You were kind of there.
Well, prior to working at Shepherd, had you went to the investment lane for residential real estate?
Absolutely.
That had already started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Already started.
I'd been in that for 5-6 years at that point.
Okay. And then when does Fountain Square start to take off as you plant roots even deeper? You step into the shepherd position. Wife steps into planning with the school.
Yep.
And you just start to get this like rooted feeling. Well, we get a lot, and the majority of people that watch this probably live in California, would be my guess.
Right.
And are looking at Indianapolis because they're like, ooh, familiar names in Indianapolis. I want to know how to invest in real estate.
Right.
And the answer to them are going to be, when you dig deep and you plant here, that's when things start to blossom.
I think so. That is something. So we've got investors that work with us, right? And they invest to their goals.
Yeah.
I have investments that are not local, right? What I look for there is, who are those that I can engage, who I can trust at a very high level, who are relationally connected within my sphere, right? Who have a track record of going and getting it done. And that, as we look at investment real estate, and again, as a financial asset that can be used within, to the highest and best of our lives, you look for the places where you can engage those who can back up what they say. There's a lot of people out there selling false hope, right? So
That's how I make the best clients.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean,
not me selling false hope, garnering the people who were sold false hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then making it right. And showing them the relational equity. Being able to take the energy that I have and pour into the marketplace. They have other energy that's in a market without opportunity, being California or somewhere that's overpriced, that's oversaturated, and they need to be able to move into our skyline to help paint it.
And to speak to, hey, when someone's first starting out, right, and they're buying their first, I think it takes an honest assessment of the margin in each of those buckets.
Yeah.
You only have so much money to buy so much time, right, to go develop so much, relational engagement. But someone is using their money to get to know you guys, to go help, build up this, the capacity of financial wealth into this rock. So whether they have $10 or 10 million, I think one thing that's critically important, and I wish I had more of when I was getting started out, was someone sitting in the seat as an advisor to say, let me show you how we can take what you have and start the machine, right? So for me, something I did for way too long was everything. I went and found the home. I went and, and fixed it up, arranged the financing, got it out there on the market, got it leased up, handled the phone calls, of 2 a.m. and the furnace is out, or the toilet's clogged, or I'm locked out, or whatever that is, right? And you can do that in your first, 1, 2, if you're on the ground and you're there, great. But once you start to build a portfolio, right? Once you even get 5, 6 properties in, let me tell you, winter hits, right? Furnaces start going out. 1's a pain. 2 hurts.
Yeah.
3 gets your attention of, I don't want to do this anymore, right?
I have a HVAC tech at a rental property right now.
I believe
actually.
Right.
And so how long, or my question here is, I didn't do everything from the start. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I missed out on some really valuable learning of going and putting the carpet in, of leasing it out. I've had someone help me lease from the very start to focus on growing the business, which has helped me get to 12 units in 3 years at age 29. I couldn't have done that if I was hammering a nail all day long. But would you say those early years did give you a lot, or do you wish you would have outsourced earlier?
There's value to the experience. I think my path was inefficient. I will say likely by Well, I can't say just dumb luck. I did not get into the craze of daisy chain and adjustable rate mortgages and scaling up. And so I was in a pretty good position when 0809 came around to go buy a number of short sales and foreclosures and tax properties that were, are still great today. But because I was still at that time doing everything, I missed out on, I probably could have done 10 times what I did during that time because I was still doing it all myself. I should have learned for a year or two and then really focused where I was good, but I did not have anybody in that realm who was saying, Rex, what are you doing? It was kind of, this is just what you do. Right. And remember, this is not back in the day. I found a book on investment real estate, read it, but there weren't podcasts out there. You didn't have
just
people
doing
talking.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your first investment property, if I recall, you actually called up your parents and were like, what is it? Name a interest rate that would, make you
ecstatic.
Could you talk a little bit about that and, buying that first one and that experience?
Yeah. So there was a good opportunity, $25,000 house, 4-bed, 2-bath, that was, came up on the market, and I knew it was a great property. It was just, which is silly to say a 4-bed, 2-bath house for $25,000. It sounds ridiculous today, right? But this is over 15 years ago.
This is
almost
for that
20
now.
years ago. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so I knew, one, this is such a low price. I probably can't get a standard loan on it. Right. What am I going to do about that? And two, I knew it was going to go quick.
Yeah.
So I just, I started, and I think this is something that we often feel like we can't do. I think we forget that the people who are our advocates, our loved ones, are people who have been with us. They want to help. They want to come alongside us in worthy things. So I called up my parents and said, what would be an interest rate that would make you excited to loan me, $25,000 to buy this property? And they were like, 7% annualized. And when do we get it back? And I needed 2 years. Okay, fine. Right. And that was it. I bought it and it was leased out at $1,200 a month from then on. And we still have it today. I paid my parents back in 2 years, like 18 months. At that point, I had kind of scaled the model. I just started telling people what we had done. Right. And at that point, I'm full bore. And there were a lot of people who were pulling money out of the market because the market was I remember Sirius XM, got down to like 11 cents a share right then. And I bought a chunk of it because I was like, I don't think the U.S., if we're bailing out banks, I don't think we're going to allow dead radios in cars for, rents. But that was lucky. At that point, they said, we'd like to get 10% too. Cause like it starts out, you loan to your parents, they start talking, you're talking, it builds. And I think it's really important to tell the story. I think people get excited when there's a win, right? And I think we consider that to be bragging. I think people need to know what works, what's succeeding, where the opportunity is. There were a lot of people who were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s back then who were excited to loan money to me because they could get a secured position, right, on a cash flowing asset. It just made sense, and there wasn't anywhere they felt safe going to do that. You didn't have near the private equity deals that you have today, so it was.
How does it look different now with private money? Because I know a lot of our listeners will be fascinated by the way you've financed and built your portfolio. What's the number of units you guys are at this point?
We hold personally about 350 something units. I should have an exact count. It's a spreadsheet.
Yeah. You didn't buy all those with your W-2 job, did you?
No.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of our clients and friends are stuck is like, great, I bought one. I bought two. I don't have any more money.
Yep.
It's all dried up.
Yep.
So how did you build the machine? I think a lot of people will be very interested in that.
Right. It was iterative. what I started out doing, isn't what I did 5 years later.
Yep.
Isn't what I did 5 years after that. So, I realized pretty quickly, as I was building it, is like there's only so many loans banks are going to give, 29-year-old guy, right? And so I started to realize I was going to have to scale this private money end. And, I started out with, I need to tell the story so that by the time the banks, are kind of tapped out with me, right? Because I hadn't built a portfolio that was large enough to, to really give back. I remember this was also a different time, right? Banks were not really excited about, doing a blanket mortgage on, 6 to 8 $75,000 properties. So, what I started doing back then was I just started telling the story to everybody I could. I mean, I just knew when people would say, "Hey, how are you?" Or "What's going on?" And, "Oh, fine. Oh, nothing." And no, I said, "Hey, here's what I'm doing." Right? I just bought my latest property. We financed it this way. It's now renting out for this. I'm looking for a next property in this, and there's some great opportunity that I've been able to press into. I'm excited for the next steps on the next ones that we're targeting. And you have those conversations enough, people start getting curious and start wondering, what could that look like for them? Oh, really? You borrowed money from, your parents' college roommate to go buy that property. Huh. How'd you do that deal? Oh, we did a, promissory note and secured it with a mortgage and gave them, 10% on the loan and 2-year, note, and we'll be able to refi it out. And here's what that looked like. Oh, could I do that? Yeah, absolutely. And then all of a sudden, oh, could my parents do that? Yeah, sure.
Right.
And it just kind of
You're
built.
putting yourself in the category of IRAs for people.
Yeah,
Their money.
Absolutely. And you have to do that. That pretty quickly transitioned into self-directed retirement accounts. It moved from I have this money that I had in the stock market and I'm nervous about what's happening there, so it's sitting on the sidelines, to, hey, I think I'd like to direct the funds towards this from a retirement account, right? That isn't really like it has been taking a beating. And then, scale really started to ramp up, from there, because those were already funds people couldn't touch that had gotten crushed in, the 08, 9, 10. And people were scared, right? I had, people saying, I don't have a decade to make back what I've lost. We need to do something different. So I think paying attention to, what is the market that needs the value I can provide was really important. And that looks different today. You've had a significant growth in private equity funds where, if someone's willing to tie up funds for 3 to 6 years, they can get a pretty significant return on that money. I mean, one of the things that we really had to wrestle with back in 11, 12, 13 was commercial lending on real estate largely went away under like $5 million. Right. In central Indiana, we had over 1 million vacant square feet of office space in the Miles Square in 2011. It was a problem. Like it actually threatened that lift we were talking about at the start of the podcast. And so the challenge with that was we had to figure out how to finance those past those 2-year terms if that didn't come back, fairly quickly. And thankfully it did. And new opportunities opened up and interest rates were really favorable and it worked. But, I think today, starting with that relational capital and people who want to help you get going, want and benefit with you, right? Maybe that isn't, a 10% interest rate. You probably have to go higher than that today. But can you reposition the terms of that loan, right? So that you can achieve the goal. maybe that's okay, we got to do a little higher interest rate, but interest is going to accrue to the principal. I'm not going to do monthly, quarterly, or annual payments. We're going to let that build up as principal that's going to be owed at the maturity of the note. And yes, this will be a 2-year note, but I have the election to tack on an additional year at maybe an additional point or two of interest, to continue past that and start to give that flexibility that if you see, hey, I'm not going to be able to hit my goal in this 24-month window, that you have some relief and you aren't trapped in the goal or trapped in the return.
Does it ever happen where you take someone's money and in 2 years, I don't know, maybe you had a furnace go out, some vacancy, and you don't have the money? That's probably because not everyone. What I don't want people to hear from this podcast is, okay, go ask your parents and all your friends for money to go invest in Indianapolis, feel in California, and how
Actually,
you feel here.
I want you to hear. I want people to hear the opposite. I want people to be less excited to buy real estate and more excited to bet on the horse and invest private money.
Right.
I feel like that is the safe play to have control.
Most of the people talking to us from California should be investing in Max or Rex, who are investing it for them, who live, work, and play here.
I think
do that well, in my opinion. Yes.
As a point of diversification within your portfolio, lending a portion of the liquid funds you have is definitely worth considering in this environment.
Yeah.
Right. I think also it depends on where you are in your life cycle. Right. Yeah. The risk I was willing to take in my 20s and what I was willing to do as far as a non-cash producing asset, very, very different than someone who's in their 50s and 60s and is starting to look at, I need to ensure a stability of cash production that I'm eventually going to be living on and putting into, different facets in the home stretch of my time on this earth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then to your point on the unforeseen expense, or you have a sewer lateral collapse, you have an AC unit go out, you have, a roof that needs redone, cannot stress enough the importance of having a budget is great, but a personal cash flow plan is critical, right? How much cash do I have? How much liquidity do I have? How much access to capital do I have, right? And what do I budget my expenses to be personally in this endeavor, whatnot, so that well before you have a problem where it could come, right? So if you look at that and you go, oh, we had a $10,000 expense we didn't anticipate, that impacts our cash flow projection substantially. We have a problem in 90 days. You can do a lot about a problem 90 days out. You can't do much about it cheaply, effectively, efficiently when it's in your lap. And so my encouragement to anybody who's getting into real estate is you have to get disciplined about tracking your budgeted cash flow against your actuals. And that's really any business owner. That's as much for realtors as it is, people in the investment real estate game. Probably the biggest area of exposure I see in business in general is not accurately forecasting and tracking cash flow, and correctly evaluating the risk that you have in front of you. And if you see that 90 days out and that note's due, you have 3 months to go pull in someone else who can take the position over. You can get creative about solving the problem. If you need to sell the property, you can go and sell the property. But by and large, you're going to creatively, again, tap that relational wealth to go bring someone else in because someone wants to play ball.
How often are you paying off your private investors with a refinance or a sale versus the cash flow?
Oh, all the time. 100%. Almost always with refi. If we're selling an asset, it's because we have someone who's interested and is willing to pay somewhat of a market premium, or I have a deal that is good enough. I'm willing to let this go fast so that I can go get that quick without, it's like I don't have the time to go bring in the amount of capital necessary, right? with, investor contacts, and I have someone who's ready to go, right? So if I can go make a great A play over here by losing a B play over here, right? I don't mind if I didn't sell it at market premium. I'll go do that all day long because the net is I just won. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go buy real estate.
That's what happens every time we talk. Like, what are we doing on the sidelines?
It's hard, right? Because we get emotionally attached to this, especially the.
Well, I don't want to bet on the. I as well as a lot of people that I know have a hard time betting on the future value of the property to pay investors off.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big block.
I think what a majority of people will hear as you talk through, wisely budget for capital expenditures so that it doesn't crush you, or know that it's ahead, right? Mm-hmm. Know what's about to come so that you can...
And don't spend your cash flow you make.
Right. And be able to continue to build up your own portfolio. But a lot of people will take that and go to analysis paralysis immediately.
Yes.
And they'll be confined by the spreadsheet of, that it doesn't work. Like you're saying, how do I bet on the future appreciation? Because it's in the future, right? But there's so many things in Indy right now that just point towards that growth.
Well, you're also showing it's safer than you. I mean, all the avenues, like you could find someone else to take their position. You could, worst case scenario, sell the property, and more than likely the value is going to go up and you can refinance. But I think that the other thing is you've shared that when you bring on an investor, let's say it's a 2-year promissory note that helps you buy a rental property or a buy, renovate, rehab, refinance, repeat, whatever, you've told me the first 2 years, you shouldn't even think of it as like your property. It's just like a bond maturing.
Right.
Like it's paying itself off, which I think is really wise. And if most people had that perspective, they would kind of get it. Like the investment will pay itself off and produce wealth in 5+, 10+ years from now.
Sure.
Which is a hard pill to swallow, honestly. Makes people want to get that cash flow 6 months in and be like, cool, I'm one step away from quitting my W-2 job.
Right.
Reality is, buddy, you're not even close.
Well, and that's the challenge is that, in real estate in the long game, it's not a straight line. You have inflection points where you're able to spread cost over a critical mass of units, where you're just learning and getting better at doing it, where you are gaining the ability to see more of the playing field and move more pieces before they're right up on your door. And once those things start to come together, I mean, I had the first 10 years in investment real estate were incredibly inefficient. They were slow. We built up a total of about 50 units, right? In the 10 years after that, we added 300. It just, that type of growth, I've never seen it.
Well, you get better over time, right?
Yes.
Projecting, you come up on that one, $15,000 sewer line goes bad. You're not going to make that mistake again.
No, well, yeah.
You're going to have the cash for it, or you're going to see the problem before it comes. And that compounding effect, I think really what you did wisely, you said that it stopped you from scaling, that you could have more. I kind of disagree. I feel like you had to be in the trenches to be able to build that up.
Learned a ton.
To just fail and say, yep, I messed up. I learned a lesson, and here's what I'm not going to do again. I'm going to go right next time instead of left and be able to build it up.
Yeah, and you're going to buy a bad property. I mean, it's good. You do enough of them. I bought one, I think it was like the third or fourth. I bought it with a cash advance on a credit card because it was that. I mean, I think it was like $18,000. It's a 2-bed, 1-bath. It was, renovated. It was a nightmare. We had the first 3 tenants in there were horrible. I mean, just vacancy, damage, and it was around the corner from my house. I thought this is a slam dunk. Now, and I would have, if I could have just gotten $5-6 for that property at the lowest of the low about 2 years into that, I probably would have done it just because I was so burnt out on the property. About 7 years after that, we ended up selling that property for $124,000. Right?
Dang it.
So
I can't sell my duplex now.
That's hard, but playing that long game, the way you play the long game well is you give yourself enough time with the different risk elements that are out there to stay ahead of them. and you don't, I mean, it's so tempting to go distract yourself and not press into the critical elements of finding that person to take over that position, reworking the financials to get them to work, really drilling down on how you're going to bring that into your total strategy as a productive element for the long run is hard. And when you haven't done it before, it's unknown. It's like staring out in the abyss. But if you can buy yourself the time and do the hard work to pay attention to the right opportunities and the right risks and get ahead of them, then real estate just does what it does, which is candidly playing the long game, go up. That's what it does.
Time in the market, not time in the market.
Yeah, I want to get your take on where Indianapolis is going. Definitely before we end this podcast, you've shared with me that Indianapolis has had the highest percentage of GDP growth in the last 5 years of any Midwest city, beating out Chicago, beating out Columbus. It's neck and neck with Columbus in population growth, while all the immediate states around us seem to be kind of deteriorating. Rust Belt cities were kind of a shining city on a hill in some ways. What do you see in Indianapolis's future, let's say in the next decade?
Yep. From a real estate perspective, what I see, and we've seen this ramping up for a while, we've now hit this critical mass across those three spaces, work, play, home, that is allowing a tabletop kind of resurgence or second kick. That if you just go look at the developers that are coming into central Indiana who weren't here 5 years ago, you look at Hendrix doing Bottle Works, and now Circle Center Mall. They don't do
Huge
that.
projects.
They don't do that if certain growth metrics don't exist for the locale they're making that plan, because they're candidly looking to lose money for maybe 3 to 5 years. But that level of investment, I mean, Bottle Works still has 3 or 4 more phases left on that development. It's already a massive, massive build. Look at the investment group out of New York that owns the Stutz, that, and what they're doing. They have other buildings acquired. There is a multi-phase plan to add residential, and you don't even, it is almost impossible to fully appreciate that level of investment from a group like that until you see what they've done in other cities. And as you step back and look at how that investment is happening in just the mile square, you see something that has never been done in our lifetimes here, which is billions. I mean, billions of dollars going into, the mile square of Indianapolis over the next 5 years that totals up. I think this is still accurate. More money getting invested over that amount of time than the past 35 years in the mile square collectively. That's incredible. And then you look at the strategic play at the state level, right? Realizing Indianapolis makes up almost 50% of the GDP of the state, using that to then help the development of the adjacent cities. You're starting to see this second ring of lift, not only in, Lebanon and, Whitestown and whatnot, but in areas like Anderson, Mooresville, Greencastle. That's a big Shelbyville, Sheridan. If you look at what the state is doing in the investment of the I-65 corridor to Lebanon, the fact that Eli Lilly is investing $15 billion there is spectacular. But look beyond that to the supportive investment of all the other companies that are looking to play ball there. It's way more than that. And it's a very exciting, reality. I mean, if you're in Lebanon and you've lived there for a while, I'm sure there's some tension about what's going to change. But that whole area is seeing an incredible investment that runs up to Purdue, that is doing their own. I mean, that market, West Lafayette, that's why we launched the brokerage up there last year. That is a market.
Extremely low inventory, extremely competitive housing.
Absolutely. And continues to chug on in value. And I'm a pretty bullish guy on our ability to attract talent. From other major cities, we're seeing that, hands down. But I am not hating the fact that I-65 corridor runs up to the third largest city in the U.S. that sits in a state that is not in a great financial position, we have a huge attractive value play to the Chicago market that we're benefiting from.
And as agents, we're feeling that. We see that.
For sure.
We see people mobilizing and moving here. It's just expensive to live in Chicago.
And honestly, we're a better locale than we have been. That was a big element of like back 10 years ago, people didn't care how cheap it was to live here.
Right.
They weren't coming.
They're like, we'll just continue to suffer and because it's better than Indy, but not now.
I guess
we're on the
and
rise.
what I want people to see is like we're kind of on the start of this curve that's going to be extremely high, and we're at the very like the lowest part of that curve.
Yep.
We're not even close to the height. And I think a lot of people can't see that yet. They don't see what Indy is becoming and they don't see the migration trends. I looked at the migration trends. We have more people than ever before coming from Chicago and California,
DC,
in the East Coast.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm talking to a lot of them.
Yep.
And a lot of them, you've mentioned this, are renting because they don't know the city. And
they're waiting for rates to come down.
They're waiting for rates.
Yep.
And rent rates, I've
or they're
never
buying
seen
cash.
3,000
Retirees
plus
for sure.
units leasing. I've never heard of that in Indy actually until 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's ubiquitous.
Right.
My buddy of mine asked me about renting his home in Zionsville on the Village. And I was like, oh, you'd probably get at least 2,800, 3,000. He comes back to me and said, I got 3,900 first day.
Yep.
Does not surprise me in Zionsville. I mean, there's not enough rental units.
No, there aren't.
Luxury
And there's also
department.
first time that we've seen people asking for multi-year leases at a premium product offering, right? So largely driven. We look at our data. We've never seen more non-317 area code applicants for rental properties than we've seen over the last 2 years. Huge shift. And
that's a rental play.
Absolutely.
Why are people not buying these new builds that can garner that? Instead, they're buying these crappy 100K properties that the Indy cash flow play.
Right.
No, maybe you should go into the luxury rental play.
2016, buying a 60K property worked really well, and renting it out.
Right.
Now I'm so much more bullish on get something that comes with a warranty to help with those capital expenditures, and also, by the way, will garner a better tenant on paper and in actuality.
You won't hear a peep from them for practically the whole lease versus your duplex. You have the SWAT team literally running the door down.
Been there. Yeah.
What happened? I don't know what happened in your duplex, but
and then I pivoted straight to turnkey, where it's
you're first. I was saying
more.
you learned, and I've learned too.
Yeah,
I'm selling off all my crappier ones.
Yeah, I learned quick when 19 homeless people were living in my place and I didn't know it. It's rough.
Well, and this is something this might be a helpful data point. It surprised me. I pulled this a couple months ago. 10 years ago, 2014, in all of central Indiana, there were 106 homes that sold for $1 million or more. All right. In 2021, that number had grown to about 360. So I can't remember it, but that, that's an interesting growth. I'm going to pay attention to that over the course of 8 years. That has my attention. The last 12 months, we've closed over 700. That growth is not being paid attention to.
No.
And it is, I think, often overlooked that is being driven by out-of-state relocation. A lot of retirees and a lot of people are coming here and can advance their career in a way where we used to be a pit stop if you were going to come. So you're seeing people come in and buy not for, a couple of years, I'm not going to invest that heavily, but I plan on being here for 10 years.
Kind of a weird question, but what would be the downfall of Indy if there was one? If all this doesn't come true?
I think it's relative to the other urban markets. So what is the exposure of Indianapolis would be if we lose our economic strength relative to our affordability as compared to the top, let's say, 20 markets in the U.S. If we don't continue to see the economic growth we do and health, we're one of the most financially healthy states in the union, okay? And if for some reason the inflation within urban central Indiana significantly outpaces, not at percentage rate, but actual dollar reality, right? Comparable locales, we'll be in trouble. Now, I look at the money coming in here, and once those ships have pushed off from dock on 9 and 10 figure and 11 figure projects, you don't really turn those around. So I'm real bullish on the next decade because they're stuck. You're committed now. We're in this. I think the interesting thing I think about there, Tyler, is okay, what happens or what's the risk as we head out of, let's say, the 2030s and into the 2040s? Are we going to hit that next level of elevation?
Right.
And it's hard to look out past that.
Right.
Typically where we see that struggle is an exodus of business, an unfavorable business climate, kind of the same thing that brought it in, right?
Well, right now you're seeing what I've heard, and I'm curious if you agree with this, is the engine of growth is the entrepreneurs and business owners and the companies like Lilly, et cetera. That is who's been pumping up the growth. The state government, I have not heard people raving that they're doing a wonderful job. They seem to be good at balancing their budgets, which that's important for the stability.
Yep.
That helps to avoid, a Chicago-like climate. But that engine of entrepreneur, there would be no jobs without entrepreneurs taking the risk, So would you agree with that? Or do you think the government is behind more of it than that?
I think the Indiana Economic Development Corporation has done a pretty darn good job of bringing awareness up at a global level to what Indy has to offer and what Indiana has to offer. I think Visit Indy has done a spectacular job of pulling attention here and ensuring a great experience. I think the Indy Chamber has done a good job of attracting people and going out to learn from others who have done it in other cities. I also think that in partnership with the state, the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which if you haven't spent time checking them out, go look at their board. That is an organization full of executives of the most influential businesses that are here, looking to ensure, right, that this environment stays business favorable, that we continue to be economically healthy, and that we're a place where business can be promoted and not restrained. Because they were set in motion to ensure that what revitalized the core of our city continues to achieve its mission. And that is good for the state. If we didn't do that, when the manufacturing jobs were lost in, Terre Haute, Richmond, Anderson, and these other cities, the pain of that reality is incredible. It's an unbelievable lift that elongates that redevelopment path and opportunity. It makes it so much harder.
Yeah. What we're talking about is important. It affects the lives of families and individuals, and real estate's an integral part of that.
For sure.
Anything else?
Nothing that I have. I have to watch this back like 3 or 4 times to process everything.
Well, we have some end of the podcast. We call them quick fire questions. If you're ready for it, they don't have to be quick answers, but what's your favorite spot to grab a bite in Indy?
Oh man. It's going to be really hard to nail down one. I would say my regular go-to would be Chili Water on Virginia. I think
Blood Orange IPA.
They brew great beer. I love their food, and we have an end of every week. We have a weekly wrap-up meeting where There's it can be switchboard members, family, and staff, can go just meet up, debrief on the day. It's kind of a nice way to wrap up the week. And honestly, they're great over there. We love having them in the neighborhood.
What's one habit that has changed your life?
Oh, one habit that has changed my life. About 4 years ago, I started working out with a trainer. And if you don't have, a high level of health, and there are multiple facets more than physical strength or whatnot, but your ability to leverage that emotional capacity that's so critical is incredibly diminished. So that for me has really helped me be able to make the most of what I'm trying to do here. And I never thought I would be able to work it in. It's great. I do it over FaceTime with my trainer at North Mass Boulder. I just actually had a workout before coming here, and it's had an incredible impact.
Any keys to success for people that have struggled to build a habit there?
Yes. In order you got to just realize that you're not going to get in a behavioral cycle of doing anything. But for this case, in working out of the gate, you're not going to want to do it every single time, right? Just realize I'm not going to want to do this for the first 3-4 weeks of doing it.
I still don't want to do it.
Right. And then if you're derailing, maybe you don't have the cash to hire a trainer. Have a friend who legitimately you have to call they have to see you on FaceTime at the gym before you start your workout.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I'm gonna start FaceTiming you. You gotta get me to the gym.
Well, the saying that I think about oftentimes is you never want to start, but you're always glad you finished.
Oh yeah,
that has been true almost 100% of the time.
For sure.
Except when I'm like super sick and shouldn't have worked out.
Oh my goodness, my brain just went to. How do you say that sentence, but yet wake up every morning and like run 50 miles? I don't get that.
Well, the first 5 minutes suck. I when I went out this morning, I didn't really want to run, but I knew that by mile 2, my legs will be warmed up. I'll feel really good. And I get a lot of endorphins. I think most people do, I would hope, from working out. So it truly for me is like I will feel better the whole work day if I work out than just the stagnation. It calcifies. It just doesn't feel good for me. Physically.
Well, there you have it. Whenever you see Tyler running on the Monon, he hates it. It sucks.
No.
And you will hate it. And
I love it
too, but it'll make you better.
It's great.
I will share one other thing that has been more, I was just sitting here thinking about this. 15 years ago, I started tracking one weekly goal that has had a huge impact. And I don't expect everybody to do the same as me, but incredibly impactful. And that is a bare minimum of 10 across the table meetings with people every week and a stretch goal of 20, not going in to try to sell them on anything, but knowing who they are, where they're at, what they're striving for, sharing similar of myself, and then looking for the easy ways to help. Often that's an email introduction, a text connection. Oh, have you thought about this? Do you know, here's a plumber that I know that might be able to help. Of 15 years of doing that intentionally and holding myself accountable to being the proactive agent and connectivity in a relationship has been incredibly powerful. As the just time has rolled on and that's compounded.
Probably almost immeasurable would be my guess.
For sure.
Through the compounding effect. Well, thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Love to have you on.
Anytime.
I think that's it.
That's a wrap.
You guys got to like and subscribe and see who we have on next.